Hey everybody, welcome back to Inside College Soccer. I know we've been quiet lately and haven't had a lot of podcasts going out, and it's because we are getting heavily into the recruiting season and placement season for our clients. It's been picking up really quickly as college teams are ending their seasons. But I'm excited to be back, and I've got a guest today that I've been on her podcast, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 times, maybe. I don't know, a lot. And she's only been on ours a couple times. And I invited her on because she has a very exciting new project and a new book. And it's something that I'm passionate about as a coach, and that is how to improve athletic performance in our players. So I'd like to welcome back to the podcast, Erica Suter. How are you?
Don, nice seeing you again. I'm really excited for this.
I am too. I saw you. I knew you'd been working on a new book. We mentioned it last year, and but I was excited to see that you've got it coming out, and I wanted to talk about it because, from what I understand, um, you know, book one is something that players can read. They can understand the whys of what we're talking about. But book two is sounds like more of a book that you do rather than a book that you just read. So why don't you tell us, why you decided to write the second book?
Right here, that's my first book. I actually have it right here, and it's a just a pretty normal size. But now here's the second book, and
So
it's
for
like a
those of you that
textbook.
aren't watching us, Erica, what's the name of your first book?
The first book's The Strong Female Athlete, and then the second book is Female Athlete High Performance. And the second book is about 3 times the size as the first. And honestly, I just this second one is so different, and I'm more excited about this one. I was excited about the first book, but this one is just something that I've wanted to talk about, and it has a very universal theme for all female athletes, and it's really all about girls chasing high performance first instead of being so scared of injury and chasing all these injury prevention programs. And I'll get into what I mean by that, but I wanted to write this book because when I was growing up, I never knew what an ACL tear was till I was maybe in high school. It just wasn't talked about a lot back then. Back then, we were more focused on playing soccer, becoming the best athletes we can be, and even with strength and conditioning programs, and this was in the early 2000s, they were marketed as programs that were performance based. There was no injury prevention in the slogans or anything like that. It was like
Right,
get bigger, faster, stronger, become
right,
explosive. And of course, as a young kid, I was like, yes, I want to be that. And
right.
it really pumped me up and inspired me to not just get in the weight room and do performance training, but it made me fearless. And I wasn't really worried about injury that much. I was just like, I'm kind of worried about losing. I'm worried about being slow. I'm worried about being weak. And I just want to raise the standard on my game. And that's really what high performance is about. It's about continuing to raise the ceiling on your performance in all areas, from the physical qualities like speed, strength, conditioning, and agility, to the mental qualities like confidence and bouncing back from mistakes. And there is a mental part to this book as well. Things like nutrition as well. And for female athletes, making sure you have balanced hormones and really vibrant health. I'm really passionate about that as well. And I just want female athletes to not be so scared of injury, because now there's all this talk that girls tear their ACLs 3 to 5 times more than male athletes. And yes, there's some research behind that, but what we're starting to find now is it's more of a lack of chasing performance training and having a good
Right.
performance program. And when girls have a good program in place, not only do they become bigger, stronger, faster athletes for their sport. But as a nice byproduct, they mitigate that injury risk because they have the strength to handle the demands of their sport. They can decelerate properly. They can react to chaos. And that the message of the book is really for girls to just be high performers, be fearless, and be warriors, because that's how it was back in the day. And I think there's definitely a mental thing going on right now with female athletes that's making them scared and kind of making them feel broken that they're female, like you have more susceptibility to injury, you have wider hips, you have a menstrual cycle, and it's like, well, darn, like we can't really change any of that. Like but what we can change is doing the things in this book, like chasing physical performance and mental performance and really tweaking all of those details.
Man, that's a lot to unpack, Erica. So, in writing this book, um, did you have additional research that you did, or was this just work that you had additional research you had to do, I should say, or was it just what you are doing with your clients now, and you just felt it was time to document it?
Yes, it's a little bit of both. So the first book was the more research heavy piece, but since that book was published 2 years ago, I wanted to include in this book the most up-to-date research in recent years. But it's so funny because we're with performance training, a lot of the research is staying consistent in the sense that strength training is good for female athletes. Like they all need to be doing it. And I know that some people will say, well, there's not enough studies with female athletes in it, but we do have enough to point girls in the direction of the gym and to let them know that, hey, having total body strength is going to help reduce your chance of injury, but more importantly, it's going to help with your speed, your acceleration, and becoming a more powerful athlete. So I do have a lot of recent research in there, and I also have a lot of anecdotal research, not just from my female athletes, but also from other performance coaches in the industry who specifically work with female athletes. And I really think that the anecdotal research from us private sector strength coaches is absolutely just as credible, because a lot of us see our athletes more than, you would in a lab when you set up a research study. Like I've seen a lot of my athletes for over 10 plus years, and within that time I've seen each stage in their development. So starting from the play stage to when they're elementary schoolers, then the cusp of puberty and going through their growth spurt as middle schoolers, and then in high school when we get into the specialization and the performance phase. Like I've seen them throughout all of that. So I really think that experience-based evidence is just as valuable. And there's so many amazing strength coaches in the private sector who work with the female athlete population and who have done so for a decade or more, and they have their own quote unquote research studies.
Yeah, yeah. No, and look, our direct experiences that we have in whatever we're doing, whatever industry or whatever thing we're working in, those are powerful, right? And then, but if those can be replicated across from other people doing the same things, then it's more credible, right? Being able to replicate what you're doing. You mentioned nutrition in the book. It's funny. I was just listening to. We mentioned before we came on the air. I'm in the middle of a podcast, Joe Rogan podcast, and listening to Gary Brecka, and talking about nutrition and talking about our American diet and what people are eating. With enriched grains and processed foods and seed oils and our vitamin intake, our nutrient intake, our macronutrient intake that we have, and how it's deficient in our diet, and basically malnourished in our American diet, not getting the nutrients that we need to allow our body to grow and repair itself. And you said that you got into this in your book. I'd like to like to hear a little bit about what you found and in your research and your thoughts on the on that subject.
Where do I even begin with this one? I mean, this is probably one of the longer chapters in the book. It's about over 40 pages, I believe. And yeah, there's a lot to get into with this. So,
Well, let's start with maybe what the most common what are maybe the most common errors that you see in an athlete's diet, and maybe what are the simplest steps that an athlete can begin to take? And then obviously they're just going to have to pick up the book to read those 40 pages. We're not going to read them here, but what are the most common mistakes or misconceptions maybe that athletes have about food and what it means to them as they're trying to perform at a higher level.
I actually kick off this chapter with a few nutrition non negotiables that I thought were some of the biggest issues in female athletes today. And the first one is they just simply don't eat enough. And whether it's intentional because of body image or maybe even unintentional, just because they don't know how much they're actually expending and how much they need to put back in, it is a really big problem because a lot of girls are not having the energy to play anymore. They're suffering from musculoskeletal and overuse injuries from lack of that energy availability from food, and they're also suffering hormonally with either irregular menstrual cycles or missed periods. So eating enough is like the first one I talk about, and we can get into all the details of like the seed oils being bad for you and the refined carbs and sugars. But I think like first and foremost, before we can graduate and focus on those details, girls just simply have to eat enough and get enough calories in. So it's like, at a tournament, if all that's around is fast food like Starbucks or Dunkin', I don't want you to be like, no, I'm not doing that because it's fast food. You still have to get something at these places. Like you have 2 or 3 games to play that weekend, and you got to get that energy in for your muscles and also for your brain to be able to perform at a high level and also not get injured. So that's the first one. And then the second one is girls don't get enough protein. It's so insane. And I was guilty of this pretty much my entire athletic career because I I was so focused on just getting like carbs and pastas and all that on my plate. And yes, there's a place for that and they should be used strategically for energy. But sometimes I feel looking back, I had too much of that at the expense of being severely protein deficient. And protein is the building block to our muscles. And it also helps female athletes to recover and not be sore the next day. And it's also good for their hormones and their mood and for their sleep. I mean, there's so many health benefits to protein, immune system function as well. And girls just aren't getting enough of it. And I wrote about a lot of my conversations with me and my athletes that when I ask them how much protein they get, they usually tell me for breakfast they'll have like 1 egg, which is 6 grams of protein, when in reality they should be having at least 20 to 30 grams of protein a meal. So they should have at least like 4 or 5 eggs if they want to meet those requirements to have that energy availability. I even have girls who don't even understand how the macronutrient works, and they think that peanut butter is a protein, but peanut butter is actually more of a fat because it doesn't have all the essential amino acids in it. Or they think avocados a protein when it's also a fat. So I think it's just like a lack of education, which is why I really wanted to get into a lot of detail in the nutrition chapter, but I wanted to start as basic as possible. And then the third non-negotiable is just making sure you stay hydrated. And I think people get hydration wrong because they think it's just drinking plain water. But electrolytes are so important for not only our muscles, but just our overall brain function and our focus. So girls need to have water, but also get in their electrolyte drinks, whether they make their own with like lemon or salt or honey, or if the only option at a tournament is Gatorade. I'm honestly not the biggest fan of Gatorade, but hey, if that's the only option to get your electrolytes, then still do that. Like you still have to get the hydration in and not worry about like all these picky details and eating as clean as possible and chemical free. I think there is a lot of fear mongering around nutrition that yes, our food is processed and has chemicals, but for a young girl, like she has to know how to make good decisions on the road at her games because that's more reality, and she has to make sure that she's fueled enough, has enough protein, and is hydrated enough.
Yeah, I'm with you on the Gatorade. Only and it's the sugar, the amount of sugar in a bottle of Gatorade that bothers me. It's
Yeah.
this, it's more than in a can of Coke. It's like people don't think about it that
Yeah.
way. So we always tried to get our kids on the road to drink Pedialyte, which has less sugar in it.
Yep.
Uh, so at least it was something for them. But that's a really good point. And I
Yeah, and
noticed,
that's I do want to touch
go
on
ahead.
the sugar thing.
Yeah,
So the whole point of this book is we do want to chase high performance, and that means we do have to eventually tweak some of those details because we can get away with eating and drinking certain things, but it's also like how much better could you feel? How much better could
right.
you perform? And I look back on even just my college career, and I got away with, having a cookies and cream milkshake before a game or eating Five Guys, and I got away with it. But I'm like, dang, I could have been even more of a beast, but I just didn't know back then. So with the sugar thing, I have a whole section in the nutrition chapter. Of course, at the end, after we go over all the basics and everyone nails that down, is being really careful with the sugar intake. And I'm not
Right.
just saying for physical performance, but for mental health. And I have a lot of new research in there on how decreasing that sugar intake is really good for alleviating certain mental health issues like anxiety, depression, OCD, ADHD, even having remission with an eating disorder, which is insane. Like you would think, oh, well, why are you restricting a girl from sugar? Wouldn't that make a girl who has an eating disorder worse? Actually, the research says the opposite, and it's very fascinating. And I'm just so passionate about using nutrition as medicine for the mental health of our athletes. And I think mental health is a huge issue now. And no one is talking about the nutrition piece. It blows my mind, especially for young girls. They're told, oh yeah, just eat whatever you want, like sugar, 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 and it's like that's the worst thing for your brain. Sugar is just as addictive as cocaine. The same neurotransmitters are firing, which is very scary. So it's really important to start having this discussion, and I really went into it in the nutrition chapter because I'm seeing a lot of mental health issues come up, and the nutrition piece being brushed under the rug, and everyone just saying, "Oh well." They're stuck with this mental health issue. It's just a quote unquote chemical imbalance. No, it's really inflammation of the brain. And how do we help with inflammation of the brain? Through food.
I love this. I really love this, and honestly, if I'm being completely transparent and honest, it's only in the last few years that I've started to pay attention to it because I was born in the early '60s. So when I was growing up in the '60s and '70s, we didn't see the same issues that we are seeing today with how our food is prepared. Uh, Pre-prepared food was packaged and frozen. It wasn't processed in the same ways that it was now. And so I grew up thinking that the way I always did it was going to be fine. But over the last few years, with all of this research coming out, like you're talking about, it's become very apparent that we are poisoning ourselves with the food that we are eating. It's not good for us. And there is a way. I saw you post something the other day or a few weeks ago talking about single ingredient foods.
Oh yeah, I love single ingredient foods, and that's one thing I really encourage in the nutrition chapter is high performance and nutrition. Like you have to prepare, you have to set aside time in your schedule to cook. And even if that means setting time aside on a Sunday night when you don't really have much else going on, the games are over for the weekend, and it takes about an hour to prepare your meals for the week and be prepared. And that's what high performers do. We think about the best athletes in the world. They are prepared in their nutrition and they don't waver in the menu that they're having. And they know exactly what they're going to eat throughout the week and what serves their performance. And I honestly think if girls eat single ingredient foods and choose foods that are the most nutrient dense, which typically are single ingredient foods, like eggs have a ton of vitamins and minerals in them, animal based proteins as well, healthy fats like fish. I mean, those have like the most nutrients packed in one ingredient, and then they're also the most bioavailable, so we can digest them pretty easily. And then they're also the most anti-inflammatory, so they don't really disrupt gut function. I have yet to hear of an allergy to meat. Or I mean, some people might be sensitive to eggs, but you never hear of anyone going into like crazy reactions or intolerances from meat or salmon or bacon even. But you hear, oh, I'm like kind of weird with spinach, or I'm kind of weird with nuts. But it's usually not these like nutrient dense animal based foods. And I really encourage girls to get those as much as possible, to put those on the plate first because they are the most nutrient dense and anti-inflammatory. But also, Don, they're the most satisfying. And when you're satisfied and you're getting the nutrients you need, you feel full from eggs or steak or bacon, you have a good relationship with food because you're just like, oh, like I'm just using food to survive and feel good and feel nourished. And you don't have to like overthink it. I feel like nutrition's just so complicated. And I always tell my athletes here in Tampa and some of my remote girls, I'm like, look, eat what you enjoy. And hey, if that's the same thing pretty much 7 days of the week, then screw it. Do that. Eat what you enjoy, but it has to be nutrient dense,
Right.
bioavailable, and anti inflammatory. So if you don't like steak, but you like chicken, then have chicken, right? Or if you don't like broccoli, then don't freaking eat broccoli. Have Brussels sprouts or carrots if you like that. So I think people just overcomplicate it. And it's like, it doesn't have, you don't have to be like thinking about food all the time. Just like sit down and eat a meal where you can survive and thrive and perform optimally.
And it doesn't have to be overly complicated either. Like you said, I love that. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's it's funny. I think back of over all my years of coaching, Eric. I had one young lady who was a vegetarian, and then, of course, I get concerned with when somebody tells me they're an athlete and a vegetarian. But she was one of the strongest kids I've ever been around, and muscularly she was phenomenal. But the amount of time, effort, and energy that she put into researching her vegetables, which ones had the highest protein content, and then making sure that she was getting lots of that, was more work for her. Just knowing that animals don't create protein, they synthesize it and absorb it. They don't create it. They get it from the plants that they eat. And then knowing that eating meat does provide other nutrients that are difficult to get when you don't eat meat. You just combine that together. Eating meat is simpler to
Yep.
get what we need. It's a simpler way to do it rather than having to research every vegetable. I know all of our clients, I give them a plant protein chart. So if they are vegetarians, that at least they've been told which vegetables have the highest amounts of protein, knowing they need to load up in those areas to take care of themselves. It's more complicated. So you're right. Trying to simplify this, I think, is important because we're all busy, right? We're all on the run. We're all on the go. We're all busy, especially young athletes.
Yeah, you can definitely simplify nutrition, just understanding the macronutrients and also understanding your deficiencies and what you really need in terms of vitamins and minerals and electrolytes and all that. But I also think eventually you get to a point in your career where it's like, okay, again, how much better can I feel? And are there insidious foods that I'm eating that are kind of ruining me over time that I don't know I have intolerance to. And these intolerances can manifest in very sneaky ways, whether it's like IBS, IBD, gut issues over time where
Right.
you're going between like constipation and diarrhea and it's super inconsistent. Like that's not normal. I think a lot of people walk around thinking that's normal because that's like their life, but it's like that's not normal. Like it should be like pretty
Right.
easy when you go to the bathroom. Some other ways it can manifest is through skin. And I've talked to one of my other colleagues about this, how a lot of girls suffer with acne and it really ruins their confidence. And acne and skin health can be solved through our nourishment. They could also have like red skin, like rosacea from certain foods. So, like, what better way to like boost a girl's confidence, but also physical performance through food? So, I think eventually, as an athlete and high performer, you have to get to a point where you go through a sort of like elimination plan where you see what foods are causing certain reactions in you, because then you're just going to raise your performance even more and you're just going to feel even better. But it does take time and you don't need to do it right off the bat, but it's something to definitely think about as you get to the next level.
Well, a little bit of intentionality, right? So if you can pay attention to how you feel after a meal when you wake up, or even a few hours later, if you can just be intentional about, well, how do I feel? Is it giving me more energy, less energy? Do I feel distracted? Do I feel focused?
Or
Uh,
anxious.
yes, do I feel anxious? Do I feel fearful? Which is something we go through as athletes. How does it make me feel? What are the feelings going through me? And if you could just journal that, like, ate pasta, ate spinach, ate whatever you ate, and then if you could just write down how you feel. And it doesn't have to be long, doesn't have to be detailed, but just even key words that you know what they mean, and just track it over a few weeks. You'll start to get an idea of how your body is reacting as you're consuming, right?
Yes. Yeah, journaling and just really paying attention to what's triggering you. And I think as athletes, like we're like too busy to even consider these things, but just do it in like a down season or maybe when you're out of school for the summer and you can pay attention to it more. It's just super fascinating because you like get something out of your meal plan and then a couple weeks later you're like, "Oh, wow, my skin isn't red anymore. I'm like glowing. The whites of my eyes are clearer." Like, oh, it was that food that did that. That's not normal. I shouldn't be having red skin and acne and all these reactions. So it's just super fascinating. And it's not talked about enough in female athlete nutrition. And also even some of the deficiencies in female athletes, kind of just universally. Protein is one of them. And then iron is a big one, especially
Yes.
during the menstrual cycle,
Menstrual
the,
cycle.
the
Yeah.
bleed phase. And then even some of the B vitamins as well. Girls aren't absorbing them well enough. B12 deficiencies, magnesium for nervous system function and hormonal health. So, yeah, I go into detail in those in the nutrition chapter as well and how people can get them through their food or maybe even supplementation because sometimes our foods don't have enough of it that we do have to go to supplements.
Magnesium's a good example. It's difficult to
Yes,
get the correct amount of magnesium only through food. It's possible, but difficult. That's a
for
good
sure.
example.
I take a
Yeah.
magnesium glycinate before sleep and you just get the best sleep ever.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
magnesium
Okay.
glycinate.
Look at me writing stuff down now. I'm
Yeah.
gonna I'm gonna go to my wife. Look, I fall asleep in 2 seconds. She's the one who sits up for hours and on
Oh,
melatonin
yeah,
and
get her
whatever
some
she's got to do.
magnesium.
Magnesium glycinate. And glycinate means that it's broken, that it's in a form that's easily absorbable. Is that correct? Do I understand that correctly, or am I
Yeah.
misunderstanding
Yeah.
that? Yeah. So that's an important term, by the way, for kids. If they're for people, if they're taking supplements, that we want that term glycinate is a term to look for. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes. Yes. Oh, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
another deficiency I see a lot is fats. Oh my gosh, where do I begin with this one? You know,
Yeah.
we grew up and we were told, okay, everything you need to get low fat milk, yogurt, skim cheese or whatever. And it's like, no, we need fats as women, not just to protect our organs and have that tissue, but we need it for our hormones too, because our hormones are actually made up of cholesterol, which no one also talks about. They think that cholesterol is the enemy. And it's like, no, for female hormones to function, we need to get enough healthy fats into our body. Butter, bacon, fish, or even omega-3 supplementation. So we definitely need it for our menstrual cycle health, but for our brains, and our brains are made up of over 70% fat. And in sports, we make 1,000 decisions in the game. So in order to function at a high level, cognitively, we have to get those healthy fats. And girls should not fear fat. I think the misconception is that fats make you fat, but it's actually sugar that does. But that's another podcast. And that insulin resistance. But fats actually are so good for the female athlete. And again, that's another really long-winded portion in that chapter.
Good. Okay. There is one other area that you mentioned in the book that I came to realize many, many years ago, well over 20 years ago, that this is the problem with a vast majority of our athletes and why they aren't performing well. And that's the mental side.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been lucky enough in my lifetime to be around literally world class athletes who have played in Olympics, who have played in World Cups, um, who have played in the NFL, and played Major League Baseball, played in the NBA. I just was really lucky being in the Bay Area to have connected with. And every single one of them that I've ever talked to says, once you get to a certain point, Don, we all can play. The separator, and I've heard as low as 80%, and I've heard them say as high as 90% is mental. That we begin to hurt our own performance by our own processing and perceive how we perceive things, how we understand things. So let's talk a little bit about what you've discovered in your career as a player and now as a coach to kids, and in your research about the mental side of the game.
I've talked to Dan Abrahams about this a lot, and we both agreed that mental training isn't always just think positive all the time. Do the affirmations, do the journaling, do all that. I mean, that is a piece of it, but it is okay for an athlete if they're going through a hard time, or maybe they made a huge mistake, or they're going through a playing rut. It's okay for them to acknowledge, okay, this isn't going well for me, and just kind of accept it and then just laugh it off. But the key is to not spend too much time in that space where you're just kind of wallowing in your sadness. Oh, I really messed up, or I'm playing so bad right now, because then you're just going to become more anxious and it's just going to get more amplified. So after you acknowledge that, okay, maybe things aren't going that well, then you shift that into, okay, what can I do next that is productive and that's going to make me perform at a high level? And I think with high performers, for them to gain that confidence back again, not only do they continue to work on their skills and master their craft and work on what they need to improve in their game, I think they also throw themselves into challenge, because you can't grow or become more confident unless you put yourself in an environment that's harder than the game. So if you're the number one person to take the penalty kick, are you practicing that at practice and maybe having your teammates kind of like psyching you out like the fans would in the stadium, right? Instead of like doing it when it's like peaceful and quiet. So that's just like an example. Or maybe you're someone who has to get better at your 1v1 skills, but you're only practicing against a cone or a dummy. Or maybe you can change that and make it harder and practice against a player who's older than you or on a higher ECNL team than you, and just continuing to throw yourself into challenge and take risks and learn how to mess up and then get up again. I think that's really the key to mental performance and gaining that confidence. And that's one of the first chapters. So the book's divided into physical performance and mental performance, and the first chapter of the mental performance half is about building confidence through challenge.
Yeah, what I've learned from Dan is that, we have skill sets in soccer, right? And everybody knows what those are, and coaches talk daily about how to improve those, and they coach those. But we have these mental skill sets, and we almost expect or are difficult or hard on ourselves. And we just like, why can't I get this? Why am I so hard on myself? What? But we're not practicing our mental skill sets like we practice our technical skill sets, or like we practice our physical skill sets, the things that you work on with your athletes on a daily basis. But be able to have to be able to acknowledge what our weaknesses are mentally, where we're struggling, to be able to be self-aware and recognize when we're struggling, and then to be able to make those corrections on the fly in the game requires that we practice those things in training. And when we're on a wall by ourselves, even, you can feel and you can notice what your mind is thinking and when it's getting negative and when you're getting frustrated. If you can learn to recognize those feelings and process them and then channel them into something that's more productive to you actually being a high performer, that's what's important. But in order to do that, you have to practice those skill sets, those mental skill sets. And coaches we all like to, Erica, you've seen them in locker rooms, right? And we like these poster boards. And I know Dan is not a big fan of the poster boards because these inspirational sayings are make it sound like it's simple, where coaches seem to feel like if they just post this for their players and make players aware of where players mental deficiencies are, that's sufficient, and now players know it and players should be able to go and do it, when it doesn't work that way. That's like saying a player should be able to know they should use their left foot if they're not left footed, and now they should just go and do it. But in reality, it requires practice, just like mental skills training requires practice on a daily basis. Every time you go out, every time you're thinking about your sport, you need to be aware of what the thought process is that's going on in your head in order for it to become second nature, right? Because you can't be learning this stuff in a game. It will slow you down. It needs to be almost second nature to you.
You know what I found interesting about some of the best players I've worked with is they do that piece, and they get the repetition in with their skills. They do it on various surfaces, against different opponents, against their dad, against their boyfriend or whoever, just to really up that challenge. And those girls never really struggle with confidence in our conversations because they do the skill work, they do the basic training, and then they take it to the next level by again going into that challenging environment. But I also asked them, okay, do you ever get nervous when you're in a game, or like do you get anxious? And they'll say, yeah, just a little bit, but not really. We're more so passionate and excited to play, and we're excited to be there for our team and be a part of something great. And I think that's also a piece of mental performance, is realizing that you can sometimes take the focus off of yourself in that game moment and be like, okay, how can I support my teammates and be the best I can be for them? that kind of takes the pressure off of you, because it's not like, oh, how can like I score or do this, but like it's more, how can I support my midfielder? How can I drop back for her? How can I get into a better position to receive this pass? And they're focusing on the service over the self, which I find very fascinating. And I've asked some of my girls, like, think about the best game you played. Like, you were in the zone, everything was, it just flowed, you were in the present moment, you just felt like everything was clicking. Like, what did you do that game? And a lot of them said, we just focused on being there for our teammates. And I thought that was crazy, but genius
I
at the
love
same
that.
time. Yeah.
I love that. That's
Yeah.
amazing. You know, it's funny. It reminds me of a tweet that I put out, and I wish it was my thought. It was from my buddy Tim Lenahan, who was a legend at Northwestern, coached there for 100 years. And Tim said to me one day, he said, if players would go into meetings and ask their coaches, "What can I do to help make the team better?" instead of asking, "What can I do to get more playing time?" they would see a transformation in that coach's approach to them in that meeting. So I really love that idea of just how can I contribute to make this team better? And it turns out then that the player plays better.
It works every
I
time. And I even tell
love
girls to
that.
do that at ID camps. Like,
That's
and it
gold.
yeah, and it really just, it's a relief, in all honesty. And they're like, okay, like, I just met like 20 strangers at this ID camp. We have to be a team today for just this day, and I'm going to do my best to make them look good. And as a nice byproduct, like, I show well. It's
Wow.
just, it's a great
Right.
experiment to try.
I really like it. And that takes courage, right? Because it
Mhm.
goes against what the world is telling us that we should do. Look out for ourselves, look out for number one, just take care of yourself. It's all business. It's about you, it's about you, it's about you, it's about you and your journey. It's all about you, focus on you. That's the message that we seem to be sending through social media and through the mainstream media, and frankly a lot of college coaches are sending that information to players.
For
And
sure.
your approach is much more holistic. I
Oh,
like it.
Don, you're going to love another chapter in the mental performance side of the book. It's called Service Over Self. And it opens with the quote, run far, far away from the self-love cult.
Oh, I like that.
So I know people are going to be like, well, you should love yourself. And I'm like, yes, you should, but not at the expense of not taking responsibility for others and helping other people. And I get into it in this chapter. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Just to leave
Well,
people.
I think we should love what we are and what we've become when
Mhm.
it serves others, right? I don't think that this narcissistic view that the world seems to be taking and loving that is what we should be loving. So there's a couple different issues going on. Like you said, we probably should leave it at that because you and I might end up ranting and saying things we probably shouldn't say in public. I
There were
don't know.
probably
At
things I
least I
should
would
have
be.
said in this chapter, but I'm just going to keep people hanging on the edge of their seats, and they just got to get the book. So,
Wow. I can't wait to read it. I can't wait to read it. Yeah, it's just coming out. Now, unfortunately, you won't be at the convention. I think you've got some special event coming up right before the convention.
yes, my wedding, which we are so excited for. I did want to come to the convention, but I have more important things to tend to.
I love that. I love that. Well, we're going to be going, and you know that convention's amazing. It's really not just an event; it's an experience, and it's very. If you've never been and you're a soccer coach, you should go. It's the largest coaching association in the world, the United Soccer Coaches Association. Leonard Griffin from Cal Men's Soccer is going to be there. I think Kiara Thompson from San Diego Wave is going to be there. I know Randy Waldrum, who's a social media darling amongst all of us soccer players, based on what he did with Nigeria was unbelievable. What he's done to turn Pitt around is amazing. So he's the coach of the Nigerian women's national team, if you don't know, and he's the coach at Pitt. And then you'll be able to immerse yourself into sessions. There are classroom sessions, there's field sessions, and then a lot of really good networking. Some of my best soccer relationships that I still have, 25 years later, came out of the convention. So it's really good. And for everybody out there that's thinking about going, there's a special offer. If you use the promo code ICS, that's for Inside College Soccer. So ICS 24, you'll get a discount. It's the price will be going up after December 13th. So between now and that time, the price for registration is $4.25, $4.25. Trust me, it's worth it. You'll get a lot out of the convention. So use the promo code ICS24, and you'll be able to get a discount going into the convention in Anaheim. It's the 10th, I think, through the 14th. Most of the action will be on the 11th, 12th, and 13th when everybody arrives, and it's going in full force. And you'll see thousands of coaches, literally from all over the world. They usually have at least 15,000 coaches come up to the convention in Anaheim. Hopefully, it'll be really well attended. The weather will be good. Erica, thank you so much for coming on. So, how do people find you? How do people find out? How do they order your book? Give us all of your plugs that people can use to find you.
I'm on Twitter at Fit Soccer Queen, and the book is going to be out on Black Friday, November 24th, and it's going to be on sale through Cyber Monday, and it's going to be on Amazon in paperback as well as hardcover. And I'm really excited about the hardcover version because it's actually in color. There are a lot of pictures and graphs and diagrams in the book, and it's just even better in color. So if you want to pay a little bit extra for the hardcover, it's pretty awesome.
I think I'll do that. They last longer because this, like I said,
The
a book
textbook.
like this is a book that you do, not a book that you read. So you won't be reading it once and then putting it on the shelf. You'll be thumbing through it a lot. You'll be earmarking it. And hopefully, you'll be highlighting and you'll be marking pages and you'll be flipping through it a lot. So having the hardcover will make it last a little bit longer. That's a good idea. Yeah,
For
I
sure.
like it.
Yeah, I hope you guys enjoy it. I'm so excited about this book.
Well, I am too, and I can't wait to order it. I can't wait to read it. Looking forward to it. Erica, thanks for coming on with us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Don.
All right, and for all of you that need to know more about Sports Recruiting USA, you can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on LinkedIn. So basically, even on Threads, all major social media platforms. www.srusasoccer. You can find applications. We are an invitation-only agency, and we do have a limited capacity to how many kids we can help and place into college each year. But we do have some room coming up for the 2025 class and 26 class, and so we'll look forward to seeing you on our next episode of Inside College Soccer.